2020 has had an impact on everyone in ways that no one could have predicted. As a young fashion designer about to embark on a career in the fashion industry, witnessing the impact of the coronavirus has been discouraging, to say the least. From brands closing down or on the verge of bankruptcy, to the lack of job opportunities for freshly graduated students, keeping a positive outlook for current and future situations is difficult. But this isn't what this documentary is about. At a time when life feels least inspiring and lacks motivation, I wanted to create something that brings designers back to their initial memories of fashion. I wanted designers to reflect upon moments in their life that inspire them to pursue a career in fashion. This documentary is a compilation of stories from various Toronto designers with unique backgrounds that discuss their reasons for being in fashion and what has inspired them throughout their journey. The first designer I interviewed, who is a dear friend of mine, is Jonah Solomon.
Okay, hi. My name is Jonah, and I am the head designer and the founder of a brand I created called Esty, which is named after my maternal grandmother, Estelle. I'm a graduate of Ryerson University's School of Fashion. I think a lot of my clothes has to do with tweaking ordinary silhouettes, things that we are all familiar with, ordinary shapes, and just kind of updating them in my own way. So everything comes from a place of familiarity, but it's just a little bit different. I like this idea of keeping things really classic and timeless so that the clothes, they can live in history and that nothing is just kind of throwaway. And as much as I can, trying to make the clothes, not just expensive for the sake of being expensive, but having them be really high in value. I do a lot of things involving a really loose form. I like to play with really airy fabrics, do things that are really feminine, but also kind of inject forms of masculinity into them. I think, the earliest memory I have of being interested in fashion was when I was probably 6 years old, and I was at, a store with my mom, and I stumbled upon this Project Runway book that was a toy, and basically you had this wheel that had different clothes on it and a separate wheel with different themes, so you'd spin both and it'd be design dresses in a summer style or something, and I would be obsessed with it. But the earliest memories I have of loving fashion was Marc Jacobs. The show was done on escalators, and all the girls were in these 1960s style dresses with incredible makeup, incredible hair, and that for some reason sticks out in my head a lot. And also Victor and Rolf, I think just them two were the designers that I just I think were the original inspiration for getting involved in fashion. Just this idea of escapism and fantasy is really incredible. Being inspired by designers at such an early age, I think it kind of just planted this seed in me to just keep looking at clothes in a way where it's so much more than just dressing a body. And that in and of itself is there's so much to that. But looking at how you can take cloth and how you can take color and all these things and texture and build these worlds that just bring you somewhere else. And that's what Marc and Victor and Rolf do so well. And it's just found these designers who were just so involved in the work and would just put themselves into it so much. And I remember Marc Jacobs had a huge impact on me when I was younger. And I remember always reading his biography and how he was at Parsons and he was the top of his class, and then he graduated and he did all these incredible things and went to Perry Ellis and then went to Vuitton, and just this idea that you can follow this passion and this pursuit and get to these incredible places, I think just added this motivation. When I was 16, I went to Parsons to do a summer course. I think it lasted for a month, and it was my first time being in a really intensive fashion environment with real Parsons professors and real students who would, they'd be asking a lot of the people that were doing this program and it was all involved to do this like pre-university training course. So it was like a very real simulation of what school was going to be like. And I remember coming home from it and telling my parents like the amount of like drive and motivation you need to do this industry is like incredible to me. And then that's when I only applied to like the Ryerson fashion program. It's because like this entire process of like I can do this, I can pursue this, and it's just like I think just seeing the passion of those designers really is what drove me to like get to that point. I think as what I have like come to appreciate and realize more, and it's like so cliche, but a lot of my work I think comes from very like autobiographical points of like my life and coming out into the work. Um, my mom, I think, like specifically, and she's battled breast cancer when I was in high school, and it came as such a shock. Like that's not part of our family. It's not part of our family history of health. So when she got diagnosed, it really hit everyone hard. And I think a lot of my work for a lot of time was really heavy in terms of emotion, and I was really invested in this idea of decay and the beauty that can come from decay and like the healing that can come from it and the pain that comes from it and how nuanced it is. And it was like all about seeing my mom, who was like this bright, incredible light, just like slowly be deteriorating from the inside. And then after that, thank God, she beat cancer and she started to heal and to get better and to then just see that like regenerative process and how like it brings family together, it brings people together. And so a lot of my work is finding, and now who I am as a person in general, is finding a lot of periods of light and really extreme periods of darkness and like using that as more of a strength and letting it beat you down. And I think also it helps me in like my design sense as I look at designers who I think more often than not are very much into this idea of this dark romanticism. And my like ideal designers that I follow change so constantly, and that was also some from Parsons, is really learning about design because I didn't know enough when I was there, and I said from that moment when I left that I wanted to really invest in learning a lot more. So for a long time, the designers that I looked at for work were like Miuccia Prada, Olivier Taskins, Azadine Alaya were kind of like my trifecta of just looking at people who can master tailoring and shape, master textiles, master embellishment, color, and all these things. And then over time that's kind of changed, especially now. My eye has definitely changed. And designers who I find really impactful in this moment of my life are a lot of like 90s babies. So I love looking at like old vintage Anne de Meulemeester, Olivier Taskins. I'm looking at a lot of Hermes stuff, especially Hermes by Margiela. But I'm also looking at a lot of Rick Owens. I'm looking at a lot of stuff that the Row does, that La Mer does. I think overall, what I try to find are designers who can really like evoke a sense of form and a sense of like just crafting a body in a different way and making this sort of cult like following is really interesting to me. So that's what I'm kind of been looking at now, and who knows how that will change as I go through life, and I'm sure my eye will change, what inspires me will change. But right now it's those guys.
I came across this designer a few years back on Instagram and have been keeping up with her work since. This interview was the first of many to take place over a Zoom call. Is it recording on your end, or did you get a notification?
Yep, it says recording.
Okay, amazing. This is actually my first time hosting a Zoom meeting. I'm always attending them, so
Yeah.
Okay, amazing.
Okay.
Can you briefly tell us about yourself, your brand, and yeah.
Okay, yeah. So a little bit about me. My name is Stephanie Moskal Varey, and my brand is Moskal. So I attended Ryerson University in 2011 and graduated in 2015. I completed an internship at Jeremy Lang during my second and third year. And during my third to fourth year, I went to the States and worked for Abercrombie and Fitch on an 8-week internship. Following that internship, I accepted a position before graduation and returned to the States for a role as a garment technologist. So basically a tech designer. And I stayed there for about 2.5 years. I enjoyed my time down there. I learned a lot about the corporate fashion market and really wanted to get back to design and realize my potential as a designer. It was at this time that I started working with the Suzanne Rogers Fashion Institute, and their help was integral to getting me back into schooling. My goal was to return to school to get my master's of women's wear. So moved back to Canada from the States and started my collection and presented it at Toronto Women's Fashion Week in 2018, the Rita collection. It was very colorful. And the following week, I had my interview and got into my MA with all of that design work that I had done for the fashion show, and began my freelance career working for various companies, launching their women's wear products and also being a freelance technical designer. And then in the fall of 2018, moved to London, England, where I started my master's at London College of Fashion. And it was extremely hard and very awful. It's still the most challenging, upsetting, and beautiful thing that I've ever done. And I'm so, so proud of the work that I've done there. When I think back, the moment that I was inspired to pursue fashion design, it was actually quite traumatic. I'd always been interested in art and sculpture and channeling that, and I always thought, oh, like, what can I do that I'll be, always have a creative outlet. And then I got sick in high school and I had meningitis, so I was in the hospital for quite a while. And I just remember lying there and thinking, like, I don't want to be in a hospital. I don't want to be in the medical field. I don't want to be, and all these different things that everyone was kind of pressuring me to go into in university. I was originally going to go for genetic science. And I just kept thinking, no, I want to do something that I'm going to love and that's not going to feel like work. And so that's why I chose design. And it was a huge shock to my parents because I didn't know how to sew. So yeah, that kind of is where my journey started. And I also wanted to do something that allowed me to be interested in everything and not have to single it down to one thing. I think in high school, when you're having to make this decision on what do you want your life to be and what do you want to do, it's really hard to narrow it in on one thing because you don't know what your life holds. You don't know who you're going to be or what you're going to be doing. And I think fashion has allowed me to really explore all my interests, and my collections have been inspired by everything from science to coal mining to farming, and it just allows me to express my interest in observations in a creative way that's really unrestricted. So I was able to really get going through that and took on internships in high school. I did one at a retail store, and then one at a seamstress. She's a Russian seamstress. She taught me how to sew. Her name is Marina, and her business was called Quick Needle in Simcoe, Ontario. And I'm still friends with her now. And every time I'm back in the area, I show her the magazines and the dresses and the garments, and I make sure that I'm checking back in with her to show how much I've grown from what she taught me, because without her, I never would have been able to sew anything because nobody really gave me the time of day. And in high school, a lot of people, it was quite difficult. And I hope that if anybody in high school is ever interested in design, that they reach out to me, because I tried to reach out to designers locally when I was in high school, and it was definitely a rude awakening to how the industry actually is. it's cold and people don't often want to be a mentor or help you find your own way. And I realized that very early on, that if you ask a designer when you're in high school, if you can get feedback on your portfolio, they're going to tell you to get out. So yeah, I really had to forge my own way in that one. And I actually didn't get into the Ryerson fashion program at first. I was put on a wait list. And then finally they decided to let me in. And yeah, that's how my journey kind of began. There's definitely been a lot of moments in my career development that really inspired me to act or do in a certain way. I think that I learned a lot through my internship at Jeremy Lang. I was a production intern there, and seeing how the business operates from so many different perspectives, from a production perspective and accounting and bookkeeping and styling and going to fashion weeks and stuff like that, it really, from that internship onwards, it really hammered into me that organization and belief in your own system and your own process of doing things is the most powerful thing. And through my career, I've worked in the corporate design environment, and even extending into my recent master's degree from London College of Fashion. Belief that you know how to carry out the product lifestyle cycle is just, it's so important. And I think recognizing the importance of that has been such an important thing to my success so far, is understanding that processes are there for a reason, and within these processes and these timelines, it allows you to be creative in a way that's relevant to the market. And you can create beautiful, crazy, out there garments, and that's amazing for creative expression. But at the end of the day, we all need to sell something. Yeah, I think those internships and those job experiences that I had really armed me with the ability to, go into my master's and be ahead of everybody, because I already know how to organize a fashion show and put a collection together, and I already know how to do a critical path and get everything done by a deadline, because I already know all the steps to make this happen. And I think just learning the fashion cycle from concept to runway and being confident in every step of that is the most important tool that I've been able to carry with me from job to job and even into freelance. Mm-hmm. Some moments that really have brought me a lot of joy and make me happy. It's always those culminating moments, like when you're working on a collection for 6 to 8 months, and then it's about to go on the runway, and then you see the first girl walk out, and you might not even see the entire show. You might only see 2 of the models on the runway, but just those, sometimes only 40 seconds. Those 40 seconds, I just think is such a rush and such a high to see everything that you've worked on just totally exposed to the world. It makes it all worth it. It's the most powerful feeling, and it's so funny because when I describe it to people that aren't in fashion, I say I worked this many months, and it all comes down to one moment, and it's a make or break moment, and it's so much in so little time, and it's the most rewarding feeling ever. I think those moments are when I presented my collection at London Fashion Week this past February. It's also when I presented at Toronto Women's Fashion Week in 2018. Even events where you just get little glimpses of, I'm doing this right. And just those little moments of confirmation that you hold so dear to you. I think those are the moments that I'm like, I can do this. I can do this. I can keep going. And those 40 seconds is all the fuel that you need to keep going for another year. So those are the most important moments that I constantly reflect back on. And I think that's something that Wayne Clark always told me. He's been a very good mentor of mine since my time at Ryerson. And he's always encouraged me to take a second and just reflect on the beauty of the moment, because these moments are not going to last forever. The magazine pages, they'll always be there. The fashion show footage, it'll always be there. But how you feel in that moment is something that you need to reflect back on, so that you don't forget and lose sight of how good it feels and why you're doing it. So that's definitely the most valuable piece of advice that I've gotten and continue to, remind myself.
I had the pleasure of interviewing one of my favorite Toronto designers, whose work pushes boundaries and brings diversity to the forefront.
So my name is Mick Carter. I'm a genderqueer fashion designer based out of Toronto. I live around the corner from Ryerson. I think Ryerson's amazing. The brand that I conceived and have been running for like the last decade almost is a brand called Lumostrano. Lumostrano is a non-binary fashion label that is really invested in not just clothing, but empowering gender nonconforming folks of color, so that they can definitely feel like their most authentic and alive self. There were so many moments that definitely inspired me to pursue fashion, to explore fashion. I think probably one of the first sort of memories of fashion that really excited me was just growing up and going to thrift stores with my parents. As a second generation Canadian, that was just a really important kind of part of our culture as we got ready for like the back to school season, and being able to assemble an identity, assemble a closet that really was reflective of where I was at in that moment, really felt empowering and really felt creative. And so that was probably my earliest memory of fashion. But in terms of the actual sort of creation of garments, I think it was when I came out, me and my best friends would just kind of really lift up Friday nights as being like the pinnacle of queer sociality. And so it would just be the days prior to that one Friday night, like assembling outfits, going out, to either big box stores or to thrift stores. And once again, just engaging in that sort of act of adornment. And it was so memorable, and some of the looks were iconic. They really were. And then after a while, it just kind of transitioned into me like kind of sewing garments, upcycling garments. And I think that really the way that some of those looks engaged with other people and really brought joy to other people, particularly when they were wearing them, I felt quite inspired by that. And I just really wanted to build a brand where clothes could be accessible in terms of price point, in terms of body shape, in terms of culture, but also would be futuristic and non-binary. So that kind of is how I got started. There's definitely been tons of highs and tons of lows that have really kind of informed my practice and informed my brand. I would say that one of the highs is just really having the chance to co-create fashion moments with influencers or artists of color. So one person that I've worked with a lot and really love collaborating with is an incredible trans woman named Vivek. And just being able to sort of really equip her with looks that reflect where she is at in her journey, as well as have the clothing reflect the art that she's creating. has just been really, I don't know, I keep on saying inspiring, but like really, honestly, that's kind of what it is. And so that would be kind of in a macro sort of way. And I think in a micro way, like I think it's just been collaborating with a variety of like stylists within the city and kind of engaging with their visions for various shoots and the joy that they feel when they like look through the racks of clothing and they're like, this, I have never seen this before. Have you seen this? I've never seen this before. And then they just like kind of have their models embody it in a way that is just so unique. And I think just being able to sort of extend their kind of fashion language or to enrich their fashion language and for them to enrich mine, it's just been really yeah, really inspiring. I feel like that's the word of the day. Similarly, there's definitely been lows too. So quite early on in my career, like I had been invited to show as part of a men's fashion week here in the city, and invested a lot of time, invested a lot of money, and then was told like the day before the show that the collection was way too feminine and I needed to butch it up or else I'd be removed. And because I'm that girl, I said, no, I'm not going to butch it up. So I was removed. So it definitely was removed. But then a number of my friends reached out to the community, the queer community, the fashion community, and a really important conversation ensued, and I was reinstated within the show, and it was such a resounding success. And so I think that that was a moment where I felt really lifted up by and really supported by the queer community, and I just always want to ensure that my brand is doing the same in response.
The next designer I interviewed is someone I consider to be my mentor and has taught me many things over the past few years.
Hi, my name is Rosa and I am the owner and designer of Namesake. Namesake is a custom leather jacket atelier focused on reinventing the classic leather jacket, mostly through customization. We really focus on involving the customer in the design process so that the final product is not only one that fits perfectly, but also one that suits their lifestyle in terms of customizations, design, and everything in between. My relationship with fashion, I guess, has kind of come full circle. I have always loved fashion, like since I was a little girl. I loved dressing up, I loved accessories. I was, my mom always likes to tell a story about me wearing my underwear on top of my clothes because I thought they were so pretty and I thought it looked so cool. And, I would wear, as a kid, costume jewelry up my arms, and I always had a very out there sense of style and knew I wanted to be in fashion basically as early as I could draw, and I could just spend all my time drawing dresses and I was that classic little girl obsessed with magazines and fashion. And then I started my career in fashion. When I was still in high school, I started interning for a Toronto-based designer, Joe Furkeok, and interned all the way through high school, and kind of got a taste more of what it was really like, a little bit less of the glamour, more of a lot of sweeping the studio and cleaning and doing errands and coffee runs, but I got a real sense of the industry and I was definitely hooked. And then I ended up going to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago teaches a very conceptual approach to fashion. It's similar to the Royal Academy in Antwerp insofar as you're really pushed to think outside of the box and think of fashion more as wearable art and less as, everyday clothing. And coming from my fashion-obsessed childhood, I thought I knew how to sew, I knew how to pattern draft. I really got to school being quite ahead of my cohort, and was kind of smacked in the face by this conceptual education because I knew how to draw pretty dresses and sew pretty dresses, but I had no idea how to kind of conceptualize collections or make more theoretical things, and I definitely was pushed outside of my comfort zone. And it was around that time that I was introduced to some of my still favorite fashion designers. I've always been very inspired by the fashion designers out of Antwerp and the Antwerp Six. My all-time favorite designer is Haider Ackermann, and still to this day I say, Haider Ackermann's, between the years of like 2014 and 2016, I would say was his heyday, and like those collections just like proved to me that clothes could be sort of out there and sort of conceptual, but still totally wearable and powerful. Haider Ackermann and Demeulemeester really stand out as the two who most shaped my thinking as a young designer. And when I was in school, I was making clothes that really pushed the boundaries of practicality, I would say. They weren't really things you would ever wear in real life, but it was really an exploration of materials. It's where I started working with leather and found my love for leather. And from there, I kind of had my small pinhole perception of fashion blown wide open. And then when I left school and got a job in the industry, and I worked in New York at Theory, but I was at Thaskin's Theory, so it was more of a little bit more creative than straight up Theory. But in any case, I had this huge conceptual brain thinking about fashion, and it was then all of a sudden about narrowing it very, very quickly into what was going to sell, what was going to, be the easiest for the sales teams to push, and it became so much about sales, that the creativity really fell behind. And I think that Haider Ackermann and Demeulemeester remain to be two of my favorite designers, as well as I would throw someone like Rick Owens into this category, where they're both conceptual but also incredibly wearable at the same time.
The last designer I interviewed is a friend of mine who is finishing up his time as a student and is currently completing his thesis project.
I'm Roy Loa, and I'm currently a fourth-year design student at Ryerson School of Fashion. And I'm currently working on my fourth-year thesis project, my capstone project. And it's sort of centered on the idea of toys and play objects being similar to dress objects, almost like attempting to create wearable toys or playable garments. So that's really the direction I'm currently going in, and that's what I'm currently working on. I guess my first entry into fashion, or my first time actually working with garments or sewing, would probably be making doll clothes, and that was, I guess that's also why my thesis is kind of full circle. But I think that's also one of a lot of people's first entryway into the world of fashion, to create for fun or for play. And that's what fashion's always been about for me. It's about being able to play around. One of the greatest things about working with toys is just that you have a lot more creative control. It isn't really meant to be functional. It's meant to be, when you think of doll clothes, you're not going to be like, oh, that's not going to fit on a human. I guess that's really what drew me to fashion in the first place. I also loved playing a lot of like video games and virtual worlds as a kid too. And I think that level of like in the early 2000s or late 2000s, early 2010s, just the peak of like Club Penguin and Pixie Hollow and Vantage, all these worlds where you can really customize your characters. That's also one of the most creative bits that I love from childhood, that I always just really inspired me to actually create fashion or create pieces. Just being able to customize something or be able to play around with something is what really inspired me, I guess. is definitely just the fact that I'm able to dream, or the fact that there isn't really a limit to what I can create. Um, and it's something that I do miss a lot uh, once I entered school, and also once I really was caught up on what the fashion industry is like. Um, I miss the fact that I could create clothes for dolls that I had like full control over. Not even about creative control, but just about it not having to be something tied to any context. It doesn't have to be functional. It doesn't have to fit a certain market or a certain demographic. Um, and I think that's what I really enjoyed the most, was just creating something extraordinary. And it really lent itself to using a lot more creative mediums, I guess. A lot more upcycling, especially when you're working with like a tiny doll or creating tiny stuffed animals. You really get the chance to use up whatever scraps you have. So I think definitely I miss having fun. Not that I don't have fun anymore, but there is a certain type of fun that you have when you're playing with toys or when you're a kid, that I feel like a lot of us like try and capture, or at least what I'm trying to capture in designing. The design process for me is very much about playing around, and I think that's what really that's really what my first experiences in fashion made me feel. It made me feel like I was playing. So I've never been the kind of person that really follows shows or follows trends a lot. So I'm usually always late to the party, or I usually find something years after it happens. But I guess within the world of fashion, one of the more inspirational designers for me would be like Hussein Chalayan and just his 2000 show. I think that's so cool, and that's definitely the peak definition of what I think playful fashion could be. And then what has been inspiring lately as well is also just any sort of new developments in fashion, and I think that's really a pathway that I want to go on, especially after graduating. There's this one scientist, I think, his name is Jifei Wu, and then he was at the MIT Media Lab developing 3D printed fur. So I definitely think that there are so many pathways that fashion could go in, and I think taking in everything is so important to inspiration, or so important to creativity. Um, and I do think that that's what really was established from, my first interest in fashion being by way of toys, is that it's pretty much important to take into account everything outside of the sphere of fashion as well. I know art is probably one of the first points of inspiration for a lot of people, where they look at visual art, but even TV shows or even music could be inspirational. So I definitely do think almost every point in my life could be an inspirational moment that I could take away and save for later.
There's so many things.
I would like to see the future of fashion progress in so many ways.
In a number of different ways.
I certainly have hopes for where I hope it will go.
I would love the industry to get the consumer more involved in like teaching them how processes are done, how things are made, and sort of get involved in this re-education.
Companies need to do a better job at educating consumers on responsible purchasing habits. The life cycle of a garment in somebody's closet is really, the lifespan needs to be longer.
Buying less, but buying better.
Start purchasing products that have longevity and that have that resonate emotionally with them.
And I think it's almost our responsibility to re-educate, because we've also created these fast fashion retailers that have like stopped this education process.
the future of fashion is going to be a lot more digital, and it's also going to be a lot more collaborative as well. And I think that's an amazing thing, especially taking into account the world that we're functioning in now over Zoom and over everything being connected by the Internet of Things. Focus on both the digital sphere of what fashion could be when it comes to, things like AR or virtual reality, but also taking into account the very material aspect of fashion. It needs to be touched and it needs to be tactile. So I do think some blending of the two would probably happen.
I'd also love to see just general more opportunity be made for people. I think that we have a lot of room to hear a lot of voices and a lot of stories that we aren't telling, we aren't hearing, and making room for people. And that we need to have, spaces and room for people to come in to tell the stories authentically or to collaborate in an honest way and to give credit where credit is due to people.
I've had the opportunity and the joy to sort of teach fashion at Ryerson, and just really seeing how the new curriculum is aligning with such important values of decolonization and inclusion and sustainability. And I just really feel like those three guiding principles will ensure that the next generation of designers are really invested in those sorts of ideas and those sorts of politics. And I think that the next generation of designers already are really kind of interested and committed to those sorts of principles. But I think watching that sort of evolve is really exciting.
As a Toronto-based designer, I hope that young students such as you decide to stay in Toronto. I, really think that we have a crazy creative brain drain in Toronto, and that there's a perception that to succeed in fashion, you have to be in New York or in Paris or in London. And while it might be easier to make a name for yourself in those places, there's other ways that being a Toronto designer is very conducive to, success. But I think that the first step to creating a real booming industry here is to have young, super creative people stay in Toronto. That's the reason that I try to only hire students right off the bat, start them as students and then offer them a job so that they have a place that they can be creative and work and have their fingers in the industry, because so much of our industry has left the city. So from a practical standpoint, I hope to see more designers here in Toronto so that our industry can grow here and the fabric shops stop closing, and more attention in general is brought to the amazing talent that is in Toronto.
I think all of that is what I want to see for this future of our industry, because fashion isn't going away. People always dress, people always want to wear clothes, people have a desire to buy new things, and we can keep doing that. I think we just have to be a lot more informed in why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and make sure that our industry isn't ruining the planet in the process.
For myself, the moment I knew I wanted to pursue a career in fashion was when I was 7 and realized that my closet lacked the clothes I needed to create the perfect outfit. It was then that I decided I would create the clothes that I wanted to wear. After that, it was watching and dissecting Alexander McQueen's shows that made me obsess over the world of fashion even more. Fashion is more than fabric used to clothe the body. It is more than a system that determines what clothing is currently in style and what is not. Fashion's purpose is more than fulfilling a ceaseless and capitalist agenda. Fashion has the ability to bring an escape from reality. It makes space for diverse perspectives and creates an outlet for emotion. While the future of fashion currently feels uncertain, designers know what they want to see improve. We want to see a future where fast fashion is replaced with slow fashion. We want consumers to shop better and be more aware of their spending habits and its negative impact on the environment. We want to see diversity in perspective and representation. To the next generation of designers and whoever else is watching, I hope these stories and perspectives made you smile. Most importantly, I hope it inspired you to continue to pursue whatever path you're currently on. And I hope you find those moments that will always act as a reminder that whatever your journey, it's all worth it.